So good morning, good evening, summit attendees and alumni, wherever you are, and welcome to today's installment of the 2023 Virtual Summit Guest Lecture Series. My name is Marcy Darling. I'm Senior Academic Advisor for Nova Academy, and I'll be facilitating today's lecture. From our expert today, we'll be learning about thriving in a water-stressed world. Mr. Howard will speak on the impacts from climate change that affect current precipitation patterns and water sources, and how businesses can build resilience into their operations in the face of these changes. Following the lecture, you will have the opportunity to ask questions in a live Q&A session. So when we get there, please post your questions in the Zoom chat, and we'll read them aloud for our expert to answer. Be sure to take advantage of this exciting opportunity to learn from one of the brightest minds in the field. The lecture and Q&A session should give you plenty to think about as you develop your policy solutions at the upcoming summit. Just a quick technical note before we get started. Our speakers will be sharing slides as they speak. So if you'd like to view both the slides and the speaker, you can click view on your side up in the upper right-hand corner and of your Zoom window and select side-by-side speaker. So without further ado, let's get started. It's now my pleasure to welcome Mr. Matt Howard, Vice President of Water Stewardship at the Water Council. The Water Council is a nonprofit organization and a global hub. One moment, please. Dedicated to solving critical global water challenges by driving freshwater innovation and advancing water stewardship. Mr. Howard oversees the Water Council stewardship initiatives. His 15+ years in sustainability program development and management includes time serving as a staffer in the U.S. House of Representatives and in the U.S. EPA's National Advisory Council on Environmental Policy and Technology. Mr. Howard, we are honored and excited for you to share your expertise with us. Welcome.
Well, thanks very much for that introduction. I'm honored to be here to spend a Friday evening or a Saturday morning, depending on where you're joining us from right now, to really talk about an issue, obviously for me, that I'm very passionate about: water. And hopefully you're passionate about water too. But I'm going to give you a little bit more information tonight about why we really should be raising the issue of water, access to clean water, really to the top of our priority list when it comes to things that we really need to address as a society moving forward in the face of climate change. And you can see here, just from the title, we live in a water-stressed world, and maybe many of you right now live in places where you're facing different types of challenges as it relates to getting clean drinking water or other things related to those water resources where you're living. And so I'm going to cover quite a bit of ground tonight in really, quite frankly, a short amount of time. So because of that, I'm not going to be able to touch on every region globally and sort of, discuss issues that are specific to different regions and different countries. I'm bringing to you into this discussion really my background and expertise working on water issues in North America, and specifically in the United States. And some of you may be wondering, well, how is the water situation in the United States relevant or related to what I might be facing where I live? And quite frankly, in the United States right now, we face every type of water issue and water crisis that you'll see anywhere globally. Everything from extreme water scarcity and drought to severely contaminated water quality issues, to even populations within the United States and entire cities, even in some cases, not really having secure access to drinking water on a regular basis. And so we really do have all kinds of issues here in the US that we're trying to face. And so I'll use that perspective to really talk about these issues and how they're impacting water resources globally. So I'm going to dive in here, and I kind of went back and forth in my mind about how I was going to change or alter this presentation for this particular audience, because quite frankly, the presentation that you're going to see is the presentation that I make to professionals in the field that deal with sustainability issues and water issues. I felt it was really important to level with you, to give you the truth, the way I see it in terms of water issues on our planet. But more importantly, as we wrap up and I wrap up this presentation, what you all as our next generation of leaders can do to help solve and address these challenges, because it really does rest in your hands. And it's great to, again, to have you here dedicated on a Friday night or a Saturday morning, learning more about this issue. So I'll spend really not much time at all about me. I'll tell you a little bit about my organization and the work that we do in water, but we're really going to spend most of our time talking about water issues. I'm going to introduce a new concept to you called wicked problems. This is a real concept, something that we use in the sustainability field, and I'm going to apply it to water and tell you why water is a wicked problem, and then provide sort of an overview of water stress and water issues that are related to the climate change issue and problem that we're facing right now, as well as how water is integrated and so important, obviously, within our economy. And like I said, we're going to end on a positive note, what you all can do to address these challenges in your day-to-day lives, but also as you continue in your education and ultimately in your own careers and your own jobs in the future. So with that introduction with Marcy, I mean, basically she covered the basics, right, in terms of what I've been doing, sustainability for almost 20 years. Unlike many of you, when I was in college or approaching college, sustainability was not a field of study in college when I was there, nor in graduate school. I was in graduate school. I really, in my career, kind of grew up alongside and within the field of sustainability. And so that's, I think, provided me kind of a unique perspective. My academic background is actually in economics. I have a undergraduate, a bachelor's, and a master's degree in economics. And I started at the US federal government. And it was really in that work with the US government in Washington, D.C., that I really began my career in sustainability and working with businesses on issues of energy, on waste reduction and recycling. And so from there, I went over to the city of Milwaukee, which is in Wisconsin, which is where I'm based right now, and was the chief sustainability officer for the mayor there. And so really got to work firsthand on city issues, on residential and neighborhood issues as it related to sustainability. And then ultimately, where I'm at right now, in terms of my career, with a nonprofit called the Water Council. And the Water Council is headquartered in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. You can see a little red star there on the screen in front of you. For those of you that know the geography, Milwaukee is located in the Great Lakes region, the Great Lakes International region between the United States and Canada, kind of on the eastern half of the border area between the two countries. The Great Lakes themselves represent nearly 20% of the world's freshwater reserves. And despite this, despite the fact that we have all this fresh water in our backyards in the Great Lakes region, we still have many, many water challenges, primarily related to water quality, poor water quality issues. And so this is a theme that I'm going to hit on as we continue through this presentation, that just because we see water or we have easy access to water, we can't assume that it's a sure thing in the long run. We really have to be proactive to steward that resource. And that's what we do at the Water Council. As I mentioned, we're a nonprofit. We work globally with businesses, with governments, with public utilities, drinking water utilities, for instance. And we work on issues of water innovation, identifying water technology to help companies be cleaner, to be more efficient with their water resources. And then what I do at the Water Council, stewardship. And really what we mean when we say stewardship is, how do we work with businesses to encourage them to be more sustainable when it comes to the water resources that they use and that they impact. And you'll see a little bit later when I talk a little bit about water in the economy or things that we buy at the store, how water intensive and how much water is in many of our products. Obviously, foods, beverages, lots of water. But your iPhone, for instance, or your iPad, or the laptop that you're watching this on right now, very water intensive in terms of how they make and assemble those products. So we'll talk a little bit about that later on. So that's who I am, and this is where I'm based. And again, I've been spending really the past 8 years focused entirely on water issues, and again, in partnership with businesses and really helping them to be better water stewards. And one of the things that we talk a lot about now within my group of professionals in this field is that water is a quote unquote wicked problem. And what do we mean by that? Well, if you look at the screen here, you can see that a wicked problem, by definition, is a really difficult problem to solve. And you might ask yourself, well, why is water such a difficult problem to solve? Because water issues really change from region to region, city to city, country to country. And so it requires an approach that's really based on the locality, the place that you live, right? So you can't take a one size fits all approach to address all the different water issues globally. You really have to understand local water systems like lakes and rivers, how people, how businesses, how nature rely on those systems, and then provide a solution. So that just makes it very complex to address water issues globally. And so you can see here that when it comes to water, a lot of times there really aren't clear solutions to water challenges. And again, you may scratch your head and think, well, that doesn't seem right. But for instance, where I'm located in the United States, one of our issues is very old water pipes and water infrastructure. So we have very old drinking water facilities. And in order to keep those up to date and providing clean drinking water reliably, it requires more money. And in order to get that money, they have to raise how much they charge for water from residents. And if you raise those rates too much, it could have a negative impact on residents who can't afford to pay those bills. So how do you fix that old infrastructure, those old pipes, if you can only raise your rates so much without negatively impacting the very people you're trying to serve water to? So oftentimes there aren't clear solutions to problems. There are unforeseen outcomes. We change our behaviors as it relates to water. In some places in the country, in the United States and globally, some regions are really good about conserving water. And for whatever reason, other regions aren't very good about conserving water. And so there are cultural attitudes which could have an impact on water resources. And so all of these different factors really make water a wicked problem. And so again, because it's such a complex problem, and one of the things I'm going to touch on at the end in terms of ways that you all can participate is we need people involved in water issues that come from different backgrounds, different perspectives, and have different skills to bring to the table to help us solve this complex problem. So it's both a challenge, this wicked problem of water, but it's also an opportunity for you all and for anyone who's interested in helping lead the way to a better water future. So let me set the stage a little bit. And again, maybe you're aware of some of these figures, these statistics. 40% right now on this planet, 40% of the world's people are affected by issues of severe water scarcity. And basically what that means is there's not enough water right now for them, or water resources are stressed because of how many people are relying on them. And it's not raining enough, and reservoirs are falling, et cetera. So 40%, so that's a pretty significant number. Even within the United States right now, 40 million people in the United States, just in the Western United States, are affected by a severe, what we're calling a mega drought, over 20 years in length right now, affecting the Western United States. So that's just here, let alone, again, globally. 80% of the wastewater, so the water that goes down your sink drain, your toilet, your shower, 80% of that wastewater is released to the environment back into lakes and rivers untreated. So a lot of places, nearly 20% it seems, have the resources, have the infrastructure to treat that wastewater before it's returned back to lakes and rivers. But again, nearly 80% of all the wastewater on our planet right now is making it to lakes, rivers, and ultimately into the oceans untreated. Okay, so that's obviously a problem when it comes to securing a sustainable water resource on our planet. And then in the face of climate and climate change right now, we're seeing a massive uptick in the number of water-related extreme, sort of weather events and natural disasters. And so 90% of disasters right now that we're seeing across the globe are water related. And we're talking natural events. And maybe you're thinking, well, not every extreme weather event or natural disaster involves, water or rain or snow or flooding. You're obviously right. An issue right now that's facing us again in the United States is wildfires. And so because of this mega drought in the West, we've been seeing more and more intense wildfires. And after those fires are put out and it rains, that runoff, that ash, makes it into rivers and lakes. And those rivers and lakes are supplying drinking water to communities downstream, and that can be toxic. So even unrelated with, you don't even see a direct water connection to a natural disaster can still have an impact on water resources. So we really got a lot to deal with again here on this planet as it relates to our water resources. I'm showing you here a snapshot. This is from a tool that businesses use, that governments use to really better understand and assess water risk. So how are water issues potentially going to harm my company, my community, my business, for instance. And so what you're looking at here is a color-coded map. And from the light shade all the way up to the very dark orange, sort of burnt red, that's low water stress, all the way up to extremely high water stress. And all that really means is when I say water stress, is those are areas where there's either competition for water resources, or the water resource itself is otherwise suffering from poor quality, suffering from poor quantity. There's some issue potentially driving conflict or will drive conflict in that area. And so as you can see here, again, there's a lot of water stress globally, just looking at parts of Africa, Europe, Asia Pacific. And so going back to the United States, in terms of what I know best in the work that I do, you can see here that, again, we're not immune from issues of water stress. And if you look at the left-hand side, that's the picture today. So those are the areas of significant water stress today. And again, most is in the Western United States, primarily issues of water scarcity. But you can even see that water stress is making its way up into Canada, which is a significant reserve of freshwater resources in the country of Canada. We've done a future projection. So how might water stress change over time? That's what's on the right-hand side. So that's the future, 2030, not too far away. And obviously you can see here the unfortunate picture that water stress is only going to worsen in the United States. And of course, this will be repeated elsewhere in other countries. One of the things I want to point out, I don't have a little pointer here I can use on the screen right now, but on the right-hand side map of the United States, if you can find where the Great Lakes are, kind of sort of in the middle there, the Great Lakes region there, and there's five blue-colored lakes there right in the border between Canada and the United States. You can see a bunch of red around those lakes. And again, those lakes have 20%, 1/5 of the world's freshwater reserves. And yet they're still going to face significant issues of stress. And it's not because there's not enough water, it's because of the quality of water. And so pollutants getting into waterways and pollutants getting into the Great Lakes system. So again, this is an issue that all of us need to really be concerned about, not just those of us living in water scarce regions and in arid regions, near deserts, et cetera. We all need to be concerned about water issues. So I'm just going to point out a couple of examples here, again, from the United States, just to kind of drive home this point of both literally what does water risk or water stress look like and how that's impacting people's lives. And so this is a picture that I took. This is in the state of Arizona. So think southern United States, border with Mexico. Obviously a very arid portion of the country and the continent. It's near or basically contains part of the Sonoran Desert. And what you're looking at is a canal, obviously a man-made canal. And this canal delivers water from outside the state of Arizona to the central portion of Arizona, where the city of Phoenix is. And again, little geography lesson, Phoenix is one of the fastest growing regions in North America, but yet it's very arid, very dry, not probably enough in the short to medium and certainly long term, enough water resources for the population growth that's occurring there. And so because of that, there's a need to bring water in from outside the region. And so that in and of itself is a type of risk, right? Because now that city, those communities are relying on water from somewhere else to support their economic activities. In this case, there's a significant region that grows agriculture, primarily citrus fruits. And that's where a large portion of Americans get their citrus fruits, certainly in the winter months. So it's a year-round, obviously, growing season. So you've got a large growing population, and you've got an important industry that's very reliant in drinks and uses a lot of water. Agriculture is very thirsty. In fact, agriculture globally uses about 70% of all of our water resources. So again, put yourself in the position of either living in this region or maybe being a decision maker, a manager, a government manager of water resources. And you're bringing water in from outside of your state, and you've got some competing uses of that water. You need to obviously provide enough water for your communities, for your people, for your residents and your growing population. But at the same time, you've got a really important industry from an economic standpoint that you need to support with water resources. And so this situation kind of really trying to allocate or move water from one type of water user, a resident, to another type of water user, like a business or a farm. This situation plays out globally. And again, we need really smart people involved in this industry to help make those decisions and run these systems so that they're efficient and secure and sustainable. So this situation is really, again, this plays out many regions globally, bringing water in from the outside to support a population or an economy. This is another picture I took. This is a poor picture I took, I will admit. This is a picture of the shores of one of the Great Lakes. So this is the shore of Lake Erie. So it's one of the 5 Great Lakes in the US and Canada. And what happens here, now again, remember, this is one of those lakes that is part of the 1/5 of all the water resources on the planet. Every summer, because of runoff, rain and storm runoff from farms, that runoff carries fertilizers and other things, nitrates, phosphates, carries that runoff into Lake Erie. And virtually every summer, because of the heat, causes a toxic algal bloom. So this water is so toxic, you can't drink it. You have to have a boil water order in the communities where you're located. And it got so bad about 10 years ago that it actually shut down an entire city's water system, Toledo, Ohio, which is a pretty big city in the United States. And so again, even though there is all this water available in that region, water quality issues can actually render it unsafe to drink. And certainly it's so toxic you can't touch it or swim in it. And so again, in this region, there's 2 countries that share this water resource. There's the industries, the farming industry, and then there's the cities and the communities that need the drinking water. So how would you manage this situation? Again, whether you're on the US side or the Canadian side, and how would you coordinate with all those different groups to try and address this issue? So luckily there are very dedicated groups, international groups, US, Canadian groups that work to do just that, but it's intentional and it takes a lot of time and effort. So again, there are many places globally where two countries are sharing a common water resource, and it's challenged from a water quality or a water quantity issue. So again, the need probably for where you're sitting today to really work on water issues, both internal to your country or to your region, but also external in partnership with others. All right, so that's just a little bit of a sense of some of the water issues that we're facing here in the United States. And again, I know these issues are replicated elsewhere globally. All right, so we've kind of talked about what we call water stress, kind of water risk. Now we need to do something about it, but we need to understand a couple things first before we kind of jump in and try to address this wicked problem. The first thing is freshwater systems are very complex. And what do I mean by freshwater system? It's just a fancy way of saying lakes and rivers, as well as underground storage, aquifers, and what we call groundwater. So we essentially have two large, if you will, freshwater systems. Surface water systems, again, that's everything that you can kind of see with your eye right now, looking out your window. If it's light enough to see, you can see those lakes, those rivers, streams. And then groundwater systems, what you can't see underneath your feet. And these two systems actually work together, and they sort of self-reinforce each other. And we're actually just learning more and more about how those two systems interact over the past 20 years. We obviously have a pretty good idea about how surface water bodies work, lakes and rivers. We don't have the same level of knowledge right now scientifically in terms of groundwater, but we've got a pretty good idea. For instance, one of the shortages right now in our knowledge is truly how much water, volumetric or volume by gallons or liters, how much water is contained in some of these aquifers or some of these underground systems, and how fast are we using those systems up. So a lot of that is really sort of based on conjecture, doing some forecasting and things of that nature, whereas you can see it with your eyes, right? If a local reservoir or a local river is running dry. So we've got these complex freshwater systems that we rely on. These, of course, supply us with our drinking water, depending on where you're at right now on the planet, either surface water or groundwater, or maybe some combination of both. All right, so we've got some complex natural systems that we have to understand if we want to address this issue. The next bulleted item down there, water-related legal and regulatory systems. That's just a fancy way of saying the laws that govern how we use water, how we clean water, how we move it around. And also it covers how we manage our water resources. And so from country to country, and even within countries, there are differences in the laws that govern how we use water, and also the management systems that we use to address and steward our water resources. So again, I'll give you a for instance here, using the United States, we'll stick with the Great Lakes system. Again, Canada, United States. There's an international treaty between Canada and the United States that governs the use of those Great Lakes, specifically the quality of the water within those Great Lakes. All right. So we've got an international treaty and international law that governs how those lakes are used, and it applies in the US and Canada. And then in the US, we of course have our own laws, our own federal or national laws that govern how clean water needs to be, how it's distributed and things of that nature. So we've got national laws, but then each state surrounding and province surrounding the Great Lakes has their own set of laws and regulations. So again, you can see here from a policy perspective, from a decision maker perspective, how things with water can get really complex quickly. Complex natural systems, complex laws and regulations. All right. So I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on either one of these, but again, going back to this idea of water as a wicked problem and why we need so many people involved in this, and we want so many people involved in helping to address this issue, is because it's so complex. All right. So this is a very busy, very bad slide. So if you're developing PowerPoints in the future, you're not supposed to have busy slides like this, but I did this on purpose because I'm making a point. You can see on the left-hand side there, water drops follow watersheds or basins. So for those of you that aren't familiar with the term watershed or basin, all it is, it's the area of land that drains water or snowmelt, and it goes into a body of water, whether that's a river or a lake. So that's considered a watershed. So in the United States, the Mississippi River, largest river in the US, has a watershed that drains all the rain and all the snowmelt into the Mississippi River itself. Okay. So water drops follow watersheds. Water management, so the governments, the cities, the villages that manage water resources, they follow political boundaries. And more often than not, and in fact, probably the rule is water management always follows political boundaries and very rarely follows the water drops. And this is the picture that illustrates that case. Okay, so that's what you're looking at here. Let me explain. So you can see the red circle. That's the city of Milwaukee. That's where I'm speaking to you from right now on the shores of Lake Michigan, off to the right there. The highlighted yellow, crazy looking border, that is the wastewater treatment service territory for Milwaukee. So all the wastewater that makes it into the pipes in that region are treated and then discharged into Lake Michigan. So that's what we call the service territory. All the other lines, the purple lines, the green lines, the yellow, all the other little lines, those are the outlines of all the watersheds in Milwaukee. And so you can see that even this big yellow one that I've highlighted for the service territory, even that doesn't follow, barely touches any of the natural watershed boundaries. All right. So again, the point here is water drops follow watersheds or basins. Water management, the way that we govern our water resources, follows political boundaries. And that in and of itself, of course, can be a problem for properly managing our natural resources. All right, so I think I've spent enough time on the complexity of the water systems. We need to talk a little bit about climate and water. I know right now, and maybe in your studies and maybe as part of this program too, you've probably talked a lot about carbon or heard a lot about carbon and energy. And obviously, super important, obvious priority in terms of what we need to do to hopefully mitigate climate change and really, move and transition into a renewable energy, clean energy future, right? I mean, so I'm not debating the importance of carbon or energy. What I'm telling you is climate change is happening now. Where you're located, you're feeling that climate change impact through impacts to your water resources. So we're seeing more flooding. We're seeing more extreme rain or snow events. We're seeing more drought. And climate, as this saying at the top says, if climate is the shark, water is its teeth. All right, so that's really important to remember. It's an immediate impact. It's happening right now where we live. And maybe some of you have already suffered some of the negative impacts from flooding or from drought or from severe storms or unusual storms happening at weird times of the year when it doesn't normally storm. And so for climate and water, what that really means is as the climate continues to change and warm up and heat, we're going to see more water in some places and less water in others because of how the system is sort of adjusting and changing. And so again, it's an issue that's happening right now. And I've listed some regions and some rivers down at the bottom there. We of course heard about the tragic, significant flooding in Pakistan in 2022, significant drought right now impacting Peru. The Rhine River in Germany was so low this summer that they couldn't even ship goods on the Rhine River to factories and to people's homes and to, deliver those goods outside of Europe. Jakarta, Indonesia is sinking due to land subsidence and sea level rise. In fact, they're moving the capital functions from the city of Jakarta to a different island in the country of Indonesia because of that issue. The Mississippi River, close to where I'm at right now, same issue as the Rhine. The Mississippi River was so low this summer that they had to stop barge traffic on the river for a period of time. And so these things are now the result of what we're feeling from the impact of climate to our water resources. I'll give you a statistic. I'm trying not to throw out too many statistics, but in the United States, we measure natural disaster impact by the amount of dollars that we have to spend on repairs and insurance. And so we categorize natural disasters by billion-dollar disasters. From 1980 to about 2020, we averaged, I think it was somewhere around $4 or $5 billion disasters a year in the United States. We had 18 last year alone, and the average over the past 10 years, most recent 10 years, is approaching 17. So you can just see that progression of impact happening and accelerating over time. And again, when we're talking about a natural disaster or an extreme weather event, it's impacting us through water. Too much rain, not enough rain, too much snow, snow in the wrong places or rain in the wrong places at the wrong time. California is experiencing that right now. They're still in the midst of a drought, yet they've had so much rain. We've had deaths in California. Roads, cities have been cut off from flooding. They've gone from one extreme to the other. And unfortunately, that's a situation that we're going to see repeated globally as climate continues to change. All right, so let's talk really quick here, a minute on water and the economy. Now, most people and even people that I work with in the sustainability field don't really have a good grasp of how important water is for our economy, for our goods, for our services, for the things that we buy at the store. We understand probably intuitively that food and beverages use a lot of water, and that makes sense, and they do. As I mentioned earlier, agriculture uses nearly 70% of the water resources on this planet. But besides food and beverage, everything that you buy, nearly everything that you buy, uses water somewhere in its manufacture or production. So why is water then an issue that I feel really needs to be elevated within our conversation around the economy? Well, water is a common good. And really all that means is we all share water resources. Again, going back to the Great Lakes example, Canada and the US share that water resource. We have to figure out a way to share and jointly manage and steward that resource. It's a common good. So cities on both sides of the border need that water. Farms on both sides of the border need that water. Industry on both sides of the border need that water. So it's a common good. So we got to figure out a way we manage that because it's so important to our economy. But one of the other challenges that we face when it comes to water use in the things that we make is we don't have a lot of good data, and a lot of businesses don't really track water use like they track energy or like they track waste. And so we really need to encourage businesses to do a better job of measuring how much water they're using and how they're impacting water resources. And there's a saying in English anyway, what can be measured can be improved. And so if you can start getting businesses to measure and therefore understand how much water they're using, then they can improve that usage and conserve water and use it wisely and more sustainably. So we need to improve water data availability, if you will, for businesses in general. The other thing which is really important, and I could spend 45 minutes talking about this alone, water, energy, and food are all connected. So I'll just give you two quick examples on how water and energy are connected. So wherever you're at right now, you're relying on energy, electricity specifically, right, to be able to log on to this and to watch this presentation. energy or electricity production is very water intensive. In other words, it takes a lot of water to make that electricity flow. So think of dams, hydroelectric dams obviously use a lot of water, but so do coal-fired power plants. They use millions of gallons of water every minute to cool coal-fired power plants. So we need a lot of water to produce energy. Conversely, we need a lot of energy to clean and move water. So we get our water where I'm at in Milwaukee from Lake Michigan. We have huge long pipes that go a mile out into Lake Michigan, several hundred feet deep. They pull water in, so you need a pump to pull that water in. That requires energy. You get that water to a treatment facility and you got to remove all the bad stuff from it. That requires energy. And then you got to distribute the water through the system to the city. That requires energy. So when we talk about water and energy are connected, that's the most basic example right there in terms of energy production and then providing clean water resources. You may be surprised to know that the water sector, so think drinking water provision, treating wastewater or treating dirty water, that sector accounts for about 10% of this planet's greenhouse gas emissions because it requires so much electricity and energy. All right. So again, that's another facet of that wicked problem. We obviously need water, but at the same time, it's very energy intensive and it results in emissions that could in the long run be damaging the planet. All right, so that's just sort of a broad overview of kind of water in the economy, some things to take away and think about. I'll just give you some examples here. You can see them on the screen. An iPhone, so to produce an iPhone, to make an iPhone, it requires about 3,000 gallons of water or 12,000 liters, depending on where you're at. That's a lot of water. And you're maybe wondering why it requires so much water. Primarily the microchips that power the iPhone, very water intensive. In fact, fun little story, the water that's used in the production of microchips is called ultra pure water. And they actually take water that comes in like drinking water and they remove everything from it except the H2Os. And so it's just H2O. And because of that, it functions like a super precise and almost toxic cleaner. And so they use that purified water to remove dust and particles from the microchip manufacturing process. And so, of course, we have microchips in everything, literally everything almost, it seems these days. And so that's why it's so water intensive to make something like an iPhone, let alone to make the plastic and the other parts that also require water. Blue jeans require almost about the same amount, almost 12,000 liters of water. And again, you've got to grow the cotton, that requires a lot of water. And then you have to dye the clothing or dye the blue jeans, a different color, blue, black, red, whatever color the blue jeans are going to be. That is very water intensive. And then would you be surprised to know that cars are very water intensive? I spend a lot of time working with automotive manufacturers here in the United States to help them reduce their water usage. It's very water intensive process. You can see there 18,000 gallons to produce. This is sort of an average sized car. And then last but not least, just to really get you thinking about how water is everywhere, even Google searches require water. And you may be wondering, well, how is that even possible? So the internet obviously is powered by data centers. So every time you hit a Google search, a data center somewhere has to crunch the numbers, crunch the data, and come back and supply you with some search results. And so even that simple little function of doing a Google search uses water. All right. So the takeaway is water is everywhere in our economy. It's extremely important in our economy. It's not just for food and beverage, but yet at the same time, we all kind of share in this common resource. So that presents some challenges in terms of trying to improve quality and quantity outcomes, but also some opportunities to collaborate and to partner with others to address our shared challenges. So that's why in the work that we do at the Water Council, we really talk about moving away from this idea that, water is just something that I use to grow tomatoes, or water is something that I need to make microchips so I can sell iPhones. If it's not for water, right? Those products wouldn't exist. So we kind of got to get beyond this mindset that we can just keep using this water resource. We don't need to really think about it. It's just helping us produce things that we need to live. And then we can kind of forget about the water, right? So move, this is sort of technical jargon for companies, move beyond managing water as an input. All that means is I need water to grow tomatoes, or I need water to make microchips. It's an input to make those things. We need to really think about water and kind of move to the mindset that water is an asset that needs to be stewarded. So, think about maybe your family has a car, or you've got an apartment or a house, those are assets. And you try and treat those things really well because they're very important. They make your life better. That's water. Water is an asset. And so it requires us to steward that water resource. And so if we think about even where you're located right now, chances are the city, the town, the village, wherever you're at right now, that place is there because of water, right? Either there was a spring or there was access to drinking water, or like where I'm at on Lake Michigan, it's a transportation route. So water is the reason that we are where we're at, where we live and where our cities are. So we really need to recognize then the value that water creates, not only for businesses, not only for the tomato growers or the iPhone manufacturers or the laptop manufacturers, it also creates value for our communities. And so then when we get into this idea that water is an asset, then we'll be open to collaborating with others to address our shared challenges. We'll be willing potentially to do some hard things ourselves, like maybe conserve how much water we're using, because we know it's important to our neighbor and we know it's important to businesses in our community, but it's also important for nature and for our residents. And so again, that mindset helps get us to this new place where we can begin addressing water as a wicked problem. So let's get to the good news here and kind of wrap this up. We have solutions, okay? So despite everything that I've just said about the different crises and challenges that we face, the good news is, and I say this in all truthfulness, we know what to do. We have the solutions. We know where we need to apply those solutions and where we need to do the hard work, okay? So we have all the tools that we need right now on this planet to begin addressing these challenges. So that's the good thing. And we're seeing every day new technologies to help us address these water challenges, new technologies to help homes recycle water and use it inside the home without having to bring in new water. We have technologies to help businesses on site treat water to standards that are higher than the water that they brought in from the environment, and to release it back to the environment better than the way that they found it. So we have those technologies now, and we're developing even better, newer technologies to really move us to the next level of water conservation and water reuse. Companies also know, or at least have access to knowledge on what we call best practices. So if I'm manufacturing a microchip, what's the best way to use water? What's the most efficient way that I can use water within my factory? Well, we know how to do that. Companies know how to do that. We just need to get companies and others to start sharing those best practices. So we have those best practices right now to help businesses use water smartly. Again, I talked about emerging science. Lots of great discoveries, lots of great new scientific papers on groundwater, on surface water, on ways to remediate or improve polluted waters. So again, the science is really starting to come into play now to help us. And grassroots, obviously, again, people need water to live. I don't need to say that, but it's worth repeating. And so from a grassroots perspective, we can all play a part in the solution, and that means you. And we'll talk a bit here in just a second, a couple ways for you to sort of get involved, or at least to be more aware of conversations that are happening globally around water. So I'm just going to wrap up here with a couple more slides. Put this on your homework list. Hopefully, if it's a Friday night or Saturday morning, take a little break on homework and maybe get to this on Sunday or Monday. But check out what's called the UN's Sustainable Development Goals. And so the UN's put out the UN, for short, SDGs. And these are 17 goals that are out there to help guide countries and to help guide businesses and other organizations so that we're all working together to move towards positive outcomes in these 17 areas. You can see at the top right there, number 6 is the clean water and sanitation goal. So we have a global goal on clean water and sanitation, and essentially ensuring that all people on this planet have access to safe, clean water resources, and to ensure that all businesses are using water in a responsible manner. And so check out, if you're interested, you can actually go to the website for the UN Sustainable Development Goals. You can click on number 6, the clean water goal, and then it'll tell you a bunch of important statistics and information about what you can do, or what your country can do, or what your business or your community can do to help us globally achieve this goal of clean water and sanitation for all. So last but not least, I'm going to leave you just with some more ideas in terms of career opportunities. Again, I know we've got a bunch of leaders on the call here, or on the presentation here. And so if you're thinking about, what am I going to study next, potentially a job in the future or a job now, like I said, water is being recognized as a defining issue. So if you're interested in water, it is perfect timing for you. I just mentioned, at the beginning, how sustainability wasn't even a topic area when I went to college. Of course, it is now, and very, very good water programs globally to help train students and to get them out into professions that work on water issues. Because again, water is so complex, we need all types of jobs. We need lawyers, we need engineers, we need people that work at nonprofits that can do education, we need teachers, you name it. We need people in the water space to help address these challenges. So you don't even have to be a chemical engineer to really address water issues. You can really, almost any type of job can have a positive impact on water. And so you can kind of think about, if I'm interested in water, do I want to do it all the time, which is what I do? If my job, it's water all the time, or is it just part of my job? And you can have an impact with it in the business community. You can have an impact in nonprofits like where I'm at. You can have an impact working in government. And then last but not least, the bottom 2, you can volunteer. River cleanups. There are always opportunities within communities to volunteer, to maybe measure water quality and ensure that water is safe in your community. Or like I said, just simple, yearly cleanups of, riverbanks and beaches, just to make sure that we're picking up that trash and keeping that resource clean. So volunteer and be water smart at home, no matter where you live. Be conscientious of how much water you're using, turn that tap off, when you're brushing your teeth, for instance, and just be really smart about how you use water. And so you can start there, and you can take it as far as you want in terms of your water career. So with that, I'm going to stop and turn it back over to our moderators just to see if there are any questions, but I want to thank you all for your time and attention tonight.
Thank you, Mr. Howard. All right, so it's time for our Q&A. You can post your questions for Mr. Howard in the Zoom chat, and I will read them aloud. All right, so Ainsley Brown says, in recent years, reverse osmosis has been viewed as a potential solution to the scarcity of water. Due to the large amount of energy required for reverse osmosis, do you believe it is a feasible and sustainable solution for water shortages?
So, well, first of all, that's a really good question to start with. So reverse osmosis can be a really good solution in targeted cases. So, kind of going back to this idea when I talked about, water is a wicked problem, and that there isn't a one size fits all solution. So you just can't say in every situation where there's water scarcity or a drought, let's revert to, reverse osmosis, or let's put in a desalination facility. You really have to take it on a case-by-case basis. So on sort of targeted applications, it can be very powerful and important. But again, that's the thing with water. You got to take it on a case-by-case basis, and you have to be aware of the trade-offs, because obviously that process in particular is very, very energy intensive. So there are some trade-offs there that you have to be aware of.
Okay, thank you. So as far as teenagers and young people go, are there some other things they can do to help stop the water pressures happening besides, turning off the water when they brush their teeth?
Yeah, so I think a couple things. Number one, at your school, advocate to your teachers, to your principals, to your leadership at school that, let's have some curriculum around the importance of water. Let's build that into our lessons on sustainability or climate. So I think that's one that you can do tomorrow, or you can do on Monday or Tuesday when you're back in school. The second thing is, obviously, look around where you're at. Are you near an ocean? Are you near a Great Lake? Are you near a river? And do some of your own research and just try and find out through the internet, through some basic research, kind of what are some of the challenges or the issues with this river that I see every day on my way to school. And then based on that, there are a lot of local organizations that exist to try and improve or address some of those issues at that locality. So volunteer. Local organizations love volunteers. They need volunteers. One of the things that our region where I live, we need volunteers to help measure water quality. So we call them citizen scientists. We need volunteers to go out once a week and measure water quality and then report that, to the relevant local authority so they can measure improvements or impairments over time. So that's just one example, but start with your school. Start with, wherever you're gaining your education right now, see what you can do to get water in the curriculum, or at least talk about it more in the classroom, and then do some research just on local water bodies where you live, see if there are opportunities to volunteer.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we read about a teenager who was able to dispel plastic in the ocean with some sort of invention he created. Just wondering if you think that those are feasible options for getting rid of plastic in the ocean or helping with the water supply.
Yeah, so I'm going to try and be optimistic. So I think the best approach to address the issue of plastic in our waterways is not to purchase plastic in the first place. Now, that's easier said than done, because quite frankly, my shirt has plastic threads in it, as does your clothing, as the laptop or the iPhone, right? I mean, petrochemical based plastics are really everywhere. So what we need to do as consumers is demand that manufacturers, that producers, that brands try and find alternatives to using plastic. Okay, so that's kind of the longer term approach. Now, in terms of your specific question, I think we need to try whatever we can to remove plastic from the environment that's already there in the environment. And so, yeah, I think some of these new technologies that are coming out are really amazing and can be helpful. But until we change our consumption patterns, and until we demand manufacturers and businesses act differently, we'll still be trying to figure out how to remove plastic from the environment with technologies like this. So it's really a two-pronged approach.
All right, thank you. So we have Myra Stefania Gomez Gonzalez. She says, considering the current gas crisis across Europe, would you say that hydrogen fuel could be a good strategy to get into an energy transition?
Yeah, so that's interesting. I'm actually teaching a course on energy and sustainability right now for a college in the United States, and really a large portion of the course is on the transition away from fossil fuels. And so my short answer is yes. My longer answer is the transition from fossil fuels to renewables and cleaner energy isn't going to happen overnight. In fact, it's probably going to take a generation. And you may not want to hear that, because a generation is a long time. So what I'm saying is, as a result that it's going to be a longer term transition, we need an all of the above strategy for new technologies like that. And we need to bring them online. We just need to keep moving the ball forward in terms of the different technologies that we can use to help us produce more renewable or cleaner energy.
Oh, interesting. So we have a Dicha in 10th grade who asked, do you think with the further development of nuclear fusion energy production so much more efficient, will it be more feasible to start filtering the salt out of water to become fresh water? Because it's not like we lack the technology to do so, but it's more of whether it's a profitable move for companies.
Yeah, well, again, with desalination, it's so energy intensive, and then you've got the byproduct, this brine, this sludge brine that you have to dispose of and manage. And so again, there's some significant trade-offs with desal. But in terms of the recent discovery, or the breakthrough that we just saw, I think it's obviously positive. Again, we're still some years down the road until we get that to a point where it doesn't require so much energy to start that process to occur. But again, we're seeing movement. We got to keep investing in science. And while we invest in science and these technological breakthroughs, which could take a while to get to the marketplace, it goes back to this question on plastics. We have to change our consumption patterns. And again, we have to start demanding, from our own legislators, from our own governments, from our own energy providers, that we demand cleaner, more renewable energy options, right? We don't want to just have to rely on the coal-fired power plant. In fact, in my community, there was a big effort several years ago to move from coal to natural gas. Now, natural gas still has its problems and issues, but it's certainly better than coal. So then now what's the next step from natural gas? Now there's lots of conversations in our community about how do we get more wind and solar online. So again, you got to keep moving that ball forward on the technology side. But again, as consumers, as citizens of this planet, we need to demand better from our businesses and from our energy providers.
Okay, so Yuna Otsuki says, with the growing issue of microplastic contamination, what solutions are there to clean the waters?
Yeah, so man, you're asking me all these hard questions, and I don't have like short, super optimistic answers for you. Microplastics are everywhere. They've measured it in snowfall, in the Arctic Circle. I mean, it's unfortunately it's everywhere. And so again, there are things that we can do to sort of remediate on site, in situ as it is, and try and remove some of that from sort of a contained environment. But it really goes back to we got to change the system. We got to remove plastic from the system, and our over reliance on plastic in our economy. That's the only way to move towards long-term, solutions or improvement. But again, we're seeing some really cool things on microplastics. But I mean, we're seeing it even in the Great Lakes. It's in fish. It's in the gills and in the muscles of fish, and it's in the same. It's everywhere. So again, we've got to take a step back and say, we'll focus on science. We'll continue doing what we can to remove it from the environment. But it goes back to policy and changing behavior and demanding change.
Okay, so we have Camille who says, will low concentrations of dissolved oxygen in the water kill fish? Also, will the temperature affect the quality of water?
Yes, and my area of expertise is primarily freshwater. But we're hearing obviously in saltwater in the oceans, with the increasing temperature, higher acidification within the ocean, and that's having obviously a very negative impact on aquatic life. And so yeah, those higher temperatures can be a problem. And in fact, I'll give you a little bit of a different spin on that. In the Great Lakes, in the past, before we've seen this significant change to the climate, the Great Lakes would almost freeze over entirely in the winter. And that was a good thing, because that ice would trap the water in the lakes over winter. And so water levels would be relatively stable. But what we're seeing now with less ice cover, and in fact, it's winter where I'm at. I'm in a very cold place and cold state. It's warmer than normal, and we've only got about 5% ice cover on the Great Lakes right now. And what that means is that water evaporates in the winter, and it evaporates into the spring. And so we're seeing declining in variable lake levels, which is having an impact on the shoreline and on infrastructure along the shoreline. So not only is that heat obviously bad for aquatic life, but it's also impacting, interestingly, freshwater systems inland.
All right, thank you. So Diego Quevedo Sarabia says, thank you for this amazing lecture, Mr. Howard. What could be a great starting point for studying the relations of water and global economy?
So there are a couple approaches that you could take. I think it is important, number one, just to understand how business operates and how businesses think. Even if you don't necessarily agree with those systems, I think it's important to understand how those systems operate and work. And then take some courses on, natural resources and how natural resources are used then to support the economy. And then you can start building this picture of how businesses and, different systems are reliant on these natural resources. And that'll help sort of paint a more complete picture. If you're really lucky, there are universities, globally, that have combined degrees or programs of study that combine science and business. And there are a couple in the US that actually combine water and business. There's one actually that's well known here internationally, in Milwaukee, the Great Lakes Water Institute and the School of Freshwater Sciences. And they actually combine in their major business and then science and limnology and all those water related studies. So if you don't have access to that, study business and economy and how that works, and then study natural resources and how those systems work. And then you put those two together and you'll have a better picture.
Okay, so we have Aiden Vladimir Peña Aloa asking, we know from cases where super rich people emit as much greenhouse gases as small countries of 10,000 people. And it's also known how small percentages of the population are responsible for a huge percentage of greenhouse gases. How does this inequality issue reflect into the water? And how can we as ordinary citizens from developing countries take responsibility and really make an impact on this issue?
Yeah, I thought you were going to give me all the easy questions tonight. I thought we agreed it was only easy questions. So number one, I'm not making light of the question or the issue. I mean, that's the heart of what we're facing right now. And that's why a lot of these international discussions are so challenging. Why we don't, in my view, we're not seeing enough progress at, these COP discussions, or there's a UN water conference coming up that I'll be attending in New York in March. Look, I don't have a great answer for you. Number one, water resources globally are just under stress and facing various levels of crisis, and it's impacting countries equally. Now, what's unequal, right, is the resources that are available to address those crises. And so I think it's critically important for us as a global community, again, to understand that water is a shared resource. And so we really need, as citizens, we really have to advocate, to our communities, to our leaders, to take this issue seriously and to really be willing to go to the table. And this is probably more on my shoulders, right? The global north, developed countries, put it on our shoulders to really advocate. Our countries really need to step up to do their part to help mitigate and address these challenges that, as you've rightfully pointed out, disproportionately have been caused by the developed world.
Thank you. So Rayleigh Luna asked, what would be the impact of seawater intrusion on domestic supply in coastal regions?
It's pretty significant. I'm actually working with some companies in the state of Texas and Louisiana. So if you know the geography in the US, it's on the Gulf Coast, what we call the Gulf Coast region of the Atlantic. And so a lot of manufacturing facilities right on the coast. And there's a couple of things happening. Number one, saltwater intrusion getting into the groundwater. And so a lot of those facilities directly withdraw water and they use it to produce, whatever they're making. And so they're having to deal with removing sediment and salt water from the water that they rely on for drinking and for manufacturing. So we're already seeing that happen at a pretty extensive rate, actually, particularly in Louisiana. But we're also seeing the loss of land, right? Mangroves and sort of these buffer zones between the ocean and the mainland that really have developed naturally because they serve this ecosystem purpose of slowing down storms, but then obviously cleaning water and providing a clean transition between salt and fresh water. And so we've been encouraging businesses in that region of the United States to put in money into a common fund to help rehabilitate and regrow those buffer regions. And it'll have that dual benefit of helping to slow storm surge and flooding from hurricanes, but at the same time, try and remove, and sort of kind of replenish fresh water back into the groundwater so that it kind of pushes that saltwater intrusion back out toward the ocean. So, and that, again, that situation is not, unique to that area of the United States. It's happening in other areas globally. And so those are a couple of things that we're seeing communities do.
Thank you. All right, so Yuting Lee asks, according to the aforementioned solutions, science and new technologies are crucial to the water issues. However, the costs of such solutions would be comparatively high in the current state, which could be overwhelming for the developing countries that are still in the process of industrialization. How can countries with less developed industries access up-to-date technologies to address the issues? What can they do to reduce the cost and maintain the sustainability while thriving for industrialization? Did you kind of just answered that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I sort of did, but I'll give you an example of some of the work that we do in that regard at my company, at the Water Council. We work with other organizations that are similar to ours globally in different regions of the world on technology sharing, for instance. And so how can we leverage, say, some technologies that are being developed in the US, and how can we share those, with other countries that need them, that may not necessarily have the resources to do that? And we go out and we do fundraising, or we identify partners, and so we can reduce the cost of those technologies and get them, to the water utilities or the businesses that need them. And so that's not unique to our organizations. A lot of nonprofits and even government agencies support technology transfer and sharing of best practices as it relates to water issues. And that's something the water community, the water profession, is really behind and takes very seriously. You're on mute, I think.
So Nanya Paul asks, I recently heard about an invention called the Mr. Trash Wheel based in Baltimore, where it removed floating water debris by using mechanical water power to place the trash on a conveyor belt. The organization that started this has built more than one trash wheel. It is certainly energy sustainable, but do you think these kinds of inventions are sustainable in terms of occupying space and being placed in ecological habitats?
So I'm actually pretty familiar with that, because we've got one in my city in Milwaukee, and it's so if you're not a native speaker of English, you're not going to get this pun, but it's called the Leonard Skimmer as opposed to the Leonard Skinner, which is a band. Anyway, this is a terrible joke. It's getting late here on Friday night, but we have one, and it's on our three main rivers in the city, and people love it because they see it out there removing trash from the water, right, from the river. I mean, they're there, people see it. It's relatively low cost. We have one skimmer for the city, and it's a fairly large city. It's about 600,000 people. So it's a pretty large area, and those three rivers that kind of flow into Lake Michigan. So it's not going to solve all of your floating trash, plastic bottle problems in a river, but what it does is it really encourages people to talk about trash in the water, and they can actually see something positive happening. And then again, they can kind of bring that knowledge back and hopefully sort of change their own behavior. So it's not going to change the world and it may not change, the polluted river in your city, but I think it's actually a relatively low cost thing that has a positive impact and really sends a positive message to the community because it's so visible in the community.
I love that. So Andrea Serrano says, we know that everybody knows about the water problem. However, society is not yet taking it as seriously as we would like. What do you think is the main cause of this happening, even though we can all see the water crisis we live in? How can we reach out to the society in order to involve them more in the participation of solving the water crisis?
Well, I'll tell you right now, and again, this is definitely coming from my perspective of living and being a U.S. citizen living in the U.S. The main impediment right now to action in the United States is, and again, I recognize this coming from a position of privilege, is we have water whenever we want it. It comes out of the tap. For the most part, we don't worry in our homes or hotels, or for the most part, we don't worry about whether or not we're going to have water service or we're going to have hot water. And it's always there when we need it. And so really, and in a lot of developed countries, and even, lesser developed places globally, water service is a modern miracle, right? Over the past 100 years. I mean, it really is a miracle that we are able to clean and distribute water through pipes to people's homes. I mean, it's such a game changer. We're so used to it. You know, we're generations in to this modern miracle of having water distribution in our lives. And again, to varying levels of availability, I get it, and reliability globally, but nevertheless, you know, our ancestors, you know, 300 or 400 years ago, I mean, would have given anything to have even intermediate access to water once or twice a week that was piped into a place where they lived. And so because of that, we've kind of grown used to having it when we want it, when we need it. And so it really, it focuses our attention on the fact that it's there when we need it, but we don't take time to think about the pipes. We don't take time to think about the lakes or the rivers where that water comes from. We don't take time to think about the energy that's required to clean and move that water around to maintain those pipes. It's all that water stuff, that infrastructure, it's literally under our feet. I worked for a mayor of Milwaukee. So I worked for the mayor. I did sustainability work for the mayor. And, you know, he had a saying that no politician runs on the sewer platform because you don't see the pipes. You don't see the energy. You don't see all the work and the time and the effort that it takes to provide that modern miracle of clean water delivery. And so I think we've just gotten so used to it that, you know, we see these problems, we see these droughts, even in areas of drought in the United States or other areas globally, you still have access to water. Maybe it's not coming to your house, but it's coming in a truck. You can go to the grocery store and buy a bottle of water. I mean, again, I'm not saying that's ideal or right. I'm just saying that for the most part, water's there when we need it. It may be more expensive than we want it, and it may be delivered, you know, inconveniently and maybe, you know, disruptions in service, et cetera. So because of that fact, I think it's really hard to get people to focus on this idea that there's a lot under the ground and on the surface that we're missing and that we really need to pay attention to, because when you run out of water, it's too late. And so there's another saying in English, you don't miss your water until your well runs dry.
Oh, good one. So I'm so sorry, you all, that we weren't able to get to all the questions, but I want to say thank you to Mr. Howard. That was so fascinating and great questions, everyone. And with that, we're going to draw to a close. We hope today gave you some brain food to digest. NOVA alumni, we're so happy you were able to join us today. Delegates and deciding committee, we're very excited for our 2023 summit. We hope you are as well. And thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Mr. Howard.
Thank you.